Hello, First Lutheran artists. Today we're going to do another wet in wet painting. Isn't this beautiful? This is a river that is kind of winding through the background here. And we're going to put water up here and then lay in our sky. And then we're going to put in these distant trees. See how they just kind of fade off into the sky? It looks like they're a long ways away. And maybe there's a little bit of fog looming. Then we're going to put our river in wet again, and make sure that we have lots of water on the whole paper. Lay in our trees here, and then we've got some really nice reflections that we're going to paint down here, and then some kind of sticky looking trees. Notice how the reflection is in the water. So let's get started. In your kit you should have gotten a nice big piece of watercolor paper. You might want to get, for this project, you might want to get several pieces of tape to tape this down. And if you have some kind of a board to put it on, that would be a handy thing so you can turn it upside down to work on the sky. So remember, please guys, always put your name on everything you do, because if it gets separated from your other papers, I won't know whose lovely work of art belongs to whom. So I'm going to tape this down really good now. Got a piece of tape in the middle. We don't want this one lumping up too much. There we go, taped. Okay, now the first step here is that we're going to we're going to sketch a little bit first. Here's another version of this painting I did several years ago. And then we've got this one that I did a couple of days ago to get ready for this lesson. So take your pencil and about a third of the way down, make your reference dot here, and then go across the page and make one here. The horizon line that is along here, we're going to erase that later, because looking at the sample here, you can see how it just all kind of fades together. And even after the painting is dry, you can go back and erase lines that you don't like, so that's real handy. Another thing I really love about watercolor, it's just so flexible. Okay, very, very light horizon line across here, very gently. Oh, I hear some dogs barking in the distance. It's such a beautiful Wednesday morning today. I've got my window open here in my home studio, and I'm hearing lots of birds and a few dogs barking and folks walking up and down the street. It's just a beautiful day. Okay, there's our horizon line. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start drawing our river. So the river, let's do some reference points here. Let's put one about right here, and then one about here. And we want the river to go clear off, looking back at the sample again, want the river to go clear off the page, because it's another one of those tricks, those composition tricks, to redirect your eye back to the center of the work of art. Notice we have a focal point here, and all of the lines lean in toward this focal point here. That's called composition. All right, we got the river here. I'm actually going to go up a little bit with mine. Make sure you're putting your dots nice and light. Put another one about right here. So we've got a line that comes out, and maybe a reference dot here. Okay, I'll show you what we're going to be sketching here. We're going to come along here and just do a couple of little bends here, back and down, and then the river's going to is a pretty flat river. This is pretty flat terrain here. So the river's going to come down and then wind this way. Okay, the top part of the river goes right along the horizon line. And we're going to come back a little ways. It doesn't really matter what you do here, just make sure your lines are pretty horizontal. Just a couple little inlets there. And I put a reference dot there, so I'm going to come back to there and come this side of it, down to this reference dot here, and we have one here. And kind of roundy, we don't want a sharp edge. Okay, we didn't put one out here, did we? Let's put a reference dot about right here, and that's about how far out the river's going to go. And then it's going to come down to the bottom of the paper. So we've got our meandering little river, and all this is going to be snowy or flat area. And that's all the drawing we're going to do. Now we're going to go ahead and paint in our sky. We're going to lay water all up here and do our sky. And then we're going to lift out some of the paint along here so that it looks like a little bit of fog next to the ground. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, here I go with my water. Keep your paint kit nice and close because we're going to be actually mixing some colors with this project. We're going to mix brown and blue together to get a very nice dark brown. Okay, here we go with the water. And if you can, turn your board, if you got your work on a board, just turn it around this way so that you can control your water. I want to get my water a little closer to what I'm doing here. Okay, down to the horizon line. You don't have to be too precise, but it does have to be nice and wet. Just kind of look at it from an angle, and remember, feather touch, because if you run your brush back and forth too hard on the surface of the paper, you'll damage the surface of the paper, and you get these little rolled up little pieces of paper in your painting. Okay, looks like I'm pretty wet there, especially along the horizon line, because we're going to put paint in there and then we're going to lift it back out. Okay, nice and wet. Get my water, get my paints over here. I did not pre-moisten my paints for this project because it's real easy to get too much. So I'm going to put a little bit of water in my brown, wash my brush out, put a little bit of water in my blue, and that's all we're going to need. Now, I used this little divot right here when I was painting the sample. I'm just going to go ahead and reuse that. That's what the sections in your top of your watercolor kit are for, is for mixing paint. So I'm going to get a little bit of brown here and a lot of water. This is very light. Looking back at the sample, see how nice and light that is? That way we have a contrast, another element of art here. We have contrast between the dark trees and the light background, and that creates interest in your painting. Okay, I keep going back and rinsing my brush because I want to keep my watercolors nice and pure. So see how this is really neat. You got your kind of a reddish brown, it's almost a burnt umber, and then you add blue to it, and look how it makes a nice dark brown. See, we're getting this nice dark brown here. Okay, I'm going to go back and check this now. Some of the water has soaked into the paper, which is a good thing. I'm going to check this and make sure I have plenty of water along the horizon, because this is where we're going to make it fade. I'm going to show you how to do that. So it looks like we got some fog rolling in. Oh, and the whole corner up here, my paper dried. That's the secret with this wet in wet technique, is to keep that paper wet. Okay, now I've got this mixed here, and I'm just going to very gently, starting with the corners, and just lay this in using horizontal strokes. I'm going to add a little bit more brown to mine, so it has more of a burnt sienna kind of feel in the sky. And as with most works of art, you want the corners to be a little bit dark so that it leads the eye back into the painting. Okay, here we are with the sky. Now, I'm going to put a little bit more in the corners here and let that bleed out. Now, to get the fog effect, completely dry your brush and then just go through here and start lifting out paint along the horizon. Brush up just enough so that the color is going to be a little bit lighter. Because in a minute we're going to lay some trees on this while it's still wet, your distant trees. Little puddles that you get, just lift that dude right out of there. Okay, oh, my sky's starting to look really cool. See how it's got some little clouds going on here? That's another thing that's so neat about watercolor. You never know quite what it's going to do, but you can control it to a certain extent. Okay, got my fog done. Now we're going to lay in, looking back at the sample, got to move relatively quickly here, we're going to lay in these distant trees. And we've kind of got a cone shape for most of these trees. And thinking about composition once again, we want to keep this interesting. We want to have interesting areas of negative space. You don't just want to have a bunch of trees all lined up and looking like a hedgerow. It looks more natural if you've got short trees, tall trees, got a clump over here, and then a negative space where there's no trees right there. Okay, let's see. Let's put one here. Kind of make, just, it's real easy. You just kind of make a triangle and then just let it go. Just let it wander. And keep lifting out the bottom of it so that you get that nice faded background. Maybe a little bit more up here. You got to do this, like I said, relatively quickly so that it'll work right into the water that you've already got. Kind of little short scrub trees there, lifting out the bottom of it so that it fades a little bit. Oh, that's looking cool already. Maybe make this one a little bit taller. And we've got some trees over here. Little scrubby trees. Oh, maybe one there. And just little short ones here toward the end. You don't want too much interest on the edges of your painting, once again, to help lead the eye back in to the center of the painting. Okay, I think that's about all I'm going to do. I'm going to lift out here so that we've got this distant fog kind of thing going on. If it goes down into your river, don't worry about that because we're gonna paint over that here in just a minute. Lift out the bottom here. Starting to dry, but that's fine. We want this layer to dry before we move on to the next layer anyhow. Okay, I think I've about got this one. I'm going to use my hair dryer, and now you don't want to get the hair dryer going too quickly because if you do, then the watercolor hasn't had a chance to do its crawling around thing. So once you see that your color is not moving anymore on the page, that's a good time if you want to use a hair dryer to do it very gently. I have my lovely hair dryer here, and there's two settings, low and high. And when I've got a watercolor painting that has puddles in it, you always bring the hair dryer a long ways away from your painting and put it on low. Okay, I'm going to pause the video now and dry mine. Okay, we're all nice and dry. Turn this around. So we've got our distant trees going on here. Okay, next we're going to do the foreground trees. We're going to get this whole area up close to the river wet and then lay in our foreground trees and just let them bleed out. Okay, here we are with my nice clean water. You can go ahead and go right up to the horizon there because we want these trees just to have the freedom to just grow the way they want to grow. Close to your river, but not right up to it. I don't know if you can see in the video or not, but the perimeter that I'm getting wet is, see how my brush is going about like that. Nice and wet, let it soak for a minute and then put some more water on it so we have maximum freedom for the watercolor to travel. While that is soaking into the paper, I'm going to mix some more of my blue and my brown. Oops, I'm sorry, yeah, my blue and my brown. That is really dark. And that's kind of what we want for our foreground trees. This is a little bit darker than what we used for the sky. So that's just perfect. In fact, I may even want to hit it a little bit more. All right, now I've got nice dark blue. And thinking about composition once again, we've kind of got a big tree here and two little ones going off this way and then one medium size over here. And then they'll reflect in the water down here. So think about your placement, think about where your water is. You'll probably want to put the big tree about right here so that it can reflect in the water. Okay, here we go. Start in the middle, right here. See, it's starting to crawl out already, isn't it? Very gently. It's almost like you're building a tree here. Nice big tree. And we'll keep going back and putting paint in the middle of this so that the center of it is darker than the rest of it. Okay, now let's come clear over here, kind of a medium-sized tree. That may be enough paint right there for the whole thing. And some smaller ones over here. Kind of overlapping. Well, that one's not as small as I wanted it to be, but see, I can control that to a certain extent. I can just kind of lift out some of that color by drying my brush and pulling it toward the center the way I want it to. Okay, that's looking cool. And maybe I'm going to lift out some of this down here too. Trees are kind of bleeding together, which is, you know, trees do that. Pull some of that in. So you can control it a little bit. Because let that set for a minute, let it do its thing. Kind of encourage it to maybe bleed out a little bit more. But I'm just putting plain water around the tree, and that's going to encourage it to. Okay, got a bubble here. We can pull that in to a certain extent. Okay, I'm going to leave that be for just a minute. I've got a big puddle of paint down here that's trying to get into my river. So I think I'll lift out some of that. And then as the water soaks into the paper and dries, we'll put a little bit more paint in the center of this big foreground tree here. Okay, looking good. And the water has stopped crawling, so I think I'm going to put my hairdryer on low just for a little bit. I'm not going to pause the video, just kind of get this somewhat dry so I can lay some more color on my prominent tree. Something I want to show you here, I'm getting kind of a harsh edge, so to battle that, I'm putting just a tiny bit of plain water, and that it'll still have a little bit of a harsh edge there, but it will help blend that a little bit more into the background. I don't want this to get completely dry, so before it does, I want to lay a little bit more in the center of this prominent tree here. Maybe a little bit more here to make this sky a little bit darker. These over here are just perfect. I'm going to leave them the way they are. And the water will help it to crawl out some. There's some very interesting trees here. They sure do want to grow together, so I'm just going to let them do it. A little bit more in the center here. I've kind of got a pocket right there. I can kind of encourage this up as it dries to make the center of it a little bit more dark. Okay, my prominent trees are getting a little bit darker. And without adding much water, I'm going to put a little bit more of my mixture. That's blue here. A little bit more of my mixture here. Make this just a little bit darker. Okay, now we're talking. I'm lifting out here along the bottom to keep it kind of soft. I think that's going to work for our foreground trees. Maybe just a little bit more up here. because of the way my paper is, excuse me, the way my paper is lumping up. There we go. I think we got it now. Okay, we're going to let this dry. I'm going to pause the video and dry this, and then we're going to lay in our river. Okay, my foreground trees are almost dry, so that'll be fine. We can go ahead and lay in our river. Okay, very carefully, you're just laying water along your horizon line up here. Trying to stay pretty much inside of your gentle sketching. Putting water in the river. Right along here. This is going to be just like the sky. I'm going to use a really light version of our paint. And then we'll drop in the reflection of the foreground trees. Then after the whole painting is completely dry, then we'll put in, with a drier paint, we'll put in the leafless trees that are kind of sticks coming out of the ground. Okay, I've got water in my river. It is flowing. Back to my lighter color, so I'm going to just add some water to what I had here. Quite a bit of water to what I had here. So I want this to be as light as the sky was. So we can test it up here. That's about a little bit darker than the sky. Add some more water and just start laying it in. Remember to keep your strokes horizontal. And you'll have a little bit of a harsh edge up here, which is going to be cool because it'll hopefully show the difference between the edge of the river and then the ground up there, the horizon line. Keeping your strokes as horizontal as possible. Remember, water lays on the earth nice and flat. Sometimes we get reflections in it that go up and down, like the trees we're going to lay in here in a few minutes. It's easy to start painting like this, but boy, you got to make yourself stay nice and horizontal. Think about the edge of your paper down here and go parallel with that. Right up to the edge. You may need to pause and mix up some more of your blue and brown mixture. We're getting some interesting swirls in it now. Go back and kind of go up to real close to your pencil lines, because when it's all dry, we can erase most of that pencil stuff. Okay, while the river is still wet now, we've got to lay in our reflected, these two trees here that are reflected. So, looking very briefly, the triangle shape we got going here has got to go in reverse here, and same here. So let's mix up a darker version, keeping your paints nice and pure, a darker version like we were doing for the trees. Don't forget to rinse your brush before you go back to your paint pot. These little divots here. Okay, that's nice and, ooh, that may be too dark. I'm going to add some more water to that, and then test it out here and see what I've got. A little too much, almost looks black. By the way, that's kind of the way you get black, is that you can mix, if you have a hunter's green, which is a lot darker than this, and a little bit of dioxin purple, which is close to this, you can get almost a pure black. Okay, my water is still wet. I'm going to lay in my tree, which is dots. Remember, if it's got to go opposite to the shape it is on the ground. You don't want it to be too big, but you do want it to have a nice presence. And you don't want it as dark as the tree up there, so this is going to fade out. Let's put our other one in here. And just kind of let them do their crawling thing. Since I want it so badly to grow together down here, I need to reproduce that in the, oh, that's looking cool. I'll pull this in just a touch here at the top. I'm going to leave that be. Maybe ooze this out a little bit. Oh, that is very cool. Okay, once again, we need to let this dry, we're finished with all of the wet in wet. And so the last stage that we've got after this dries is we're going to put in some of these sticks here, and then we're finished. We have another masterpiece. So back to the hairdryer as soon as it quits crawling. I think it's about to stop crawling here. Look at this. I don't know if you got any of this. See how this just kind of goes like this? Maybe that's a ripple in the water. That's just cool. Okay, back to the dryer. Okay, guys, this has gotten completely dry. Make sure it's dry to the touch because we're going to use our pencil and sketch in our trees and then paint over them. Okay, looking at the sample here, we've got one tree that kind of comes in front of here and then reflected, another here, here, and then so let's go ahead and sketch those guys in. Okay, let's start about right here and go at a little bit of an angle. Be sure and sketch very lightly up above here so that it shows up a little bit in that negative space. A couple of branches, just a few sticks, not too much. And then maybe one here, going a different direction, up a little bit. A couple of little stick branches. Now this one's leaning this way, so the reflection needs to lean this way, so that it's just the opposite. Kind of have to keep looking at this to see what your angle is. Don't go too far into the water. I've got one going here, and that one is not correct because there's not one there. So I've got one here and one here. That's enough for that. Then this one just barely leans that way, so we'll just barely lean the reflection this way. It's got a couple of sticks up here. Now the two over here, or three rather, we've got one going almost straight up. Doesn't have to be perfectly straight because you know trees kind of almost up to the top of your paper. I'd go about an inch from the top of your paper. A couple of sticks coming out. And maybe just this little part of a tree that's trying to grow. Maybe one leaning over this way just a bit. A couple of sticks there. Now a reflection. This one's almost straight down. Let's go quite a ways. Not any taller than that is, kind of measure that and don't go any taller. Keep in mind that your reflection needs to be the opposite of what you've got. A couple of sticks up here, and then this little guy kind of reflecting that way, going this way. And when we lay in the color for this, we kind of almost let our brush jump a little bit. Okay, the color we're going to want for this is going to be pretty dark. So go back to your brown and your blue. Almost stuck my brush in my purple there. So you want this to be pretty dark because you're going to be doing solid lines and not a whole lot of water. So you might want to test it on a piece of scrap paper or something close. So this is the kind of line that we're wanting to get. We're going to pull our brush. In fact, that's almost too much water. To combat that, I'm going to take some of the water out of my tray. Just lift some out with my paper towel. Dry my brush and then put a little bit more blue and brown in there. So maybe I'll get a little bit thicker mixture. It's almost like we're painting this layer with acrylic paint. We're getting there. Okay, remember to get a nice point on your brush, you twist and pull. I've shown you that in the classroom. So as you're getting your paint over here, twist and pull, and only get paint in the very tip. And if you have a piece of scrap paper or a surface you can practice on, look how light that has become. It looks like I need to make it even darker. Brown in, rinse my brush, dry it out. That may be too much blue. Well, I don't know, let's see here. Now we're getting there. Very nice, maybe a little bit more brown. You can, fiddle with your mixture until you get it the way you want it. You want it to have some brown to it because the trees are brown, but then the blue makes it nice and dark. Okay, let's go with that. Twist and pull my brush to get it to a nice point. And I'm going to start over here with this guy. Very gently. You don't want big fat trees. These are skinny trees. And as you get to the end of your tree, kind of lift your brush like that so you get kind of a point. We don't want a big blunt end. Just kind of sketch with your brush. I'm touching my paper so gently that I can barely see it. We'll do all the trees and then we'll go back and do the reflection. Lift my brush, lift to get it kind of a tapered end. And these guys over here. Relatively straight. Less and less pressure as you get toward the top so that your line will get thinner and thinner. One more here, a little bit fatter at the bottom. Releasing your pressure as you get to the top and just kind of lift your brush and feather that out. Okay, now don't add any more, okay, get this fella here. Don't add any more paint to your brush. Let's see how we can do to get our reflections, because you want the reflections to be skinnier and lighter than your tree so it looks a little bit more realistic. So very gently, just with 2 hairs on your brush. You know, I fabled one-haired brush, but we're pretending like we've got one-haired brush here. This one here, keeping in mind your reflection. I've got a little bit more blue in it. Looks like I pretty much used my brown up, but that's kind of cool. That'll make it a little more interesting. There's our little stick trying to grow there. This reflection here. Kind of jump your paint across there, and it almost looks like the water's rippling. Like this. Okay. And we are finished. Okay, you guys are getting advanced enough on some of your paintings that as well as your name on the back, if you'd like to take this same brush and very carefully, maybe very lightly, put your initials down in the bottom of your painting. Because as you get to be better and better painters, you're going to want folks to know who did the work. So there you have it. It's our beautiful winter river. Praise God, stay inspired, and keep making art.